Listen up. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to the podcast participants, and not to any participant's employer, organization, committee, or other group or individual. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. You know, for fun. So lighten up and enjoy. Oh, Stomping Jen.
Yes, Sawtooth Ring.
We are here again for a very special episode. This is after school worthy.
After school worthy?
Yes, it's a very special episode.
It's like an after school special?
Sort of. We're going to be talking about the UMass Amherst Poetry Society, which, if you listen to this podcast, you will know that is where you and I met.
It's true.
We're going to talk to some of the people who were there.
At the beginning.
Who have witnessed the meeting of Sawtooth and Jen.
Oh my God.
But what's really interesting is we're also going to talk to some folks who came after us and continued on the UMass Amherst Poetry Society.
Very cool.
Right, and we're going to understand what they did and then what they went on to do potentially in other areas, right? So this is exciting stuff. But it's very...
What?
It's very...
What is the word?
Really, it's about the beginning of Sawtooth and Jen in some ways. This is our origin story in a weird way.
It's like a Marvel.
Yeah. Are you ready to do this?
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous.
Don't be nervous.
Will you hold my hand when I play the intro music?
These people don't bite.
I know one of them bites. We're going to get to that.
All right.
All right. Okay, here we go.
The Soft Serve Podcast.
Creamy, delicious ideas without the creepy truck. Stomping
Super awkward.
Jen,
You have to sing.
why are you laughing? 'Cause I'm singing again. We're going to talk about poetry and how we met. Stomping Jen, let's get to it.
I gotta tell you.
What are you gonna tell me?
I went in our garage, in like the bowels of our garage,
Yeah.
and I literally struck gold. I found
Yeah.
a whole pile of shit from back in the day.
Yeah, I see that pile sitting in front of you.
I know, and you didn't even want to look at it.
Yeah, so that pile of shit, a lot of that is from our time that we spent in the UMass Amherst Poetry Society, right?
It's true.
Which you started
Yeah.
with one of our guests here,
Yeah.
right? So let's go around and let's say hello to some of the people who are here with us. And I'm going to start with that person who you started the UMass Amherst Poetry Society with. What year would that be?
Oh, God. Was it freshman year? It was freshman year, so it was like 95, 96.
1995. Let's do the math. How many years ago was that?
26.
26 years ago. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's say hello to Tim O. Tim O. Hi, Tim.
Greetings and salutations, my friends.
Oh my
Once
God.
again, we meet.
It's like we never left.
Well, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
I'm really excited to talk to you about the beginnings of the UMass Amherst Poetry Society. We need a shorthand for that.
What? UMass Amherst?
Yeah, we're just going to say the
Society?
Poetry
Just
Society.
Poetry Society.
Okay, I can't say all of that. My mouth is already getting dry.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
UMaps?
UMaps.
Maps.
I like UMaps. That'll work.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do UMaps.
No.
We're going to do the Poetry Society.
I
so,
agree.
All right, 1996, 26 years ago.
Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
That's a long
It
time
was a
ago.
long time ago.
But that also means that's almost as long as we've been together,
That's true.
which is also frightening in its own way. So you, too, are the original founders, I will say. And we're going to get to that in a minute.
right.
But there's some other folks here,
Yeah,
right?
let's talk to the other folks.
There are some folks here who were participants in, who would come to the meetings and read poetry and listen to poetry, and some of those folks are here. I am one of them, right?
Right, you
We've said
showed
this
up.
before. I showed up. I walked into a meeting and I read a poem.
You showed up fall of 96.
Yeah, and I have here in my hand that very poem I read, the one that captivated you,
I don't know if it was your poem. That
The one-
captivated me.
the one that made you become obsessed with me.
Oh, sure.
There are poems in that pile in front of you that are all about me and your unrequited love for me. And we're going to get to all of that later. Now, another person who would come to these meetings, right, whom I met there at the Poetry Society is the one, the only Joshua Michael Stewart, the official, unofficial poet laureate of the Soft Serve podcast. Hello, Josh.
Hello, everyone. How is everyone?
We're doing great. Thank you.
We're talking to you people.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Josh turned out to be a real poet. Now,
He's a poet.
if I'm thinking back to the first time I saw him there
Yeah.
and the first time I heard him read, I'm not sure I would have been on that horse, but he proved us all wrong.
It's true. He's stuck with it.
And he's absolutely killed it. He's published everywhere.
It's true.
He's come on here and he's talked about it, and you can find these episodes he's been on.
There are
Right.
many. Yeah.
Many, and he's talked extensively about it. But I'm proud in a lot of ways to have known him all of these years and to have seen him grow in this way.
Yeah.
It's been amazing.
Yeah, it's very cool.
To think back to when we were all undergrads
Yeah.
at this poetry society at UMass Amherst. So, now another person. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't know if he's going to be able to answer. He's eating sushi right now. He told us he called in, and he was going to feed sushi to these children he has. This is Ted. Are you there, Ted?
I'm here. I heard you with a nice intro there, and I jumped up from the table,
Oh,
unmuted myself, and went to a private room. So
Well, welcome, Ted. Thanks for being here. We're going to definitely talk with you more.
Yeah.
And I remember hanging out with you and listening to poetry with you and hearing your poetry and all sorts of things. So
yeah.
it's exciting
I
to.
feel. And thank you. I feel like I'm trying to forget any poetry I wrote when I was an undergrad.
Oh, come on. That's what it's there for. Posterity.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's good. It's good to have you here. Thanks for setting aside time to do this.
Yeah.
So,
We appreciate it.
yeah. Now, another guest we have here joining us on our Poetry Society panel is George Myers. Now, this is the first time I'm meeting George, so I don't know if our paths crossed when we were in the Poetry Society or not.
Yeah.
Stomping Jen, do you remember?
So Josh swears that there were some open mics that George and his fellow human who came after us were at.
Okay.
But I don't know that I quite remember. I think you and I, when we were done with UMass, we kind of left.
Yeah.
I don't
Well-
really remember leaving.
Let's
Yeah.
give George a chance to say hello to us and tell
Yeah.
us what he remembers.
All right, sure.
Hi, George. There's a cat walking across George's screen that may be interfering with his inability to unmute.
his
All right,
ability.
here we go. Hi, George.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Sure. Now, do
And,
you
Go ahead.
please? I was going to ask. Do you remember anybody here in this meeting from your time in the Poetry Society?
Definitely Joshua. I mean, we crossed paths quite a bit, saw him read and continued to cross paths. And I do recall, the early days that we went to the meetings where basically just Ben and I, being interested in poetry, went to those meetings and didn't know anybody and heard people read. And we went to quite a few of them. So I'm guessing we were in the same room, but it wasn't the same connection I think you and Jen made.
Yeah.
Well, we left. You finished in 98.
Yes.
In May of 98.
That's right.
And I was done by December of 98. So I don't know what years.
Now, I remember a summer.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, George.
Ben and I came in fall of 98.
Yeah. So Sawtooth was out and I was like basically out because I finished early and doubled up on classes, so I don't know how involved I was at that point. Yeah.
So if I can just jump in real quick, I remember the first meeting that George and Ben, and there was a third person who came with you guys, who I can't remember what his name was. But you guys came to our first meeting of that fall semester, and you guys talked about this painter, minimalist painter, and like you had this painting, and all it was like this one line, like just this one like blue line, and you guys went on this whole rampage about this avant-garde artist, and we were always trying to figure out, like, well, first of all, it was like, you know, is the painting supposed to look like, you know, vertical, or is it supposed to be horizontal, you know, with the one line? And then it turns out that this whole painter was like just some bullshit you guys made up. So that was the first meeting. And I know I was there, and I know Chanel was there, and Jen, you must have been there, but I know Brad, would have been gone by then.
Yeah, we're 2 minutes into this and I'm already embarrassed.
Don't be embarrassed.
Yeah, so that was actually probably our friend Tom.
Yeah, it was Tom,
who was not particularly artistically oriented in that way, but he used to actually like really make fun of us for being interested in sort of avant-garde works, and that was, I'm not blaming him for that, but that was like him kind of making fun of us and us challenging him on that, and then like taking that stupid feud into a public space to try to like sell it.
Yeah.
Really. Wow. I'm really embarrassed that we did that.
Oh, no.
And we can count on Josh to remember it all of these years later.
But it left
and
an
bring
impression.
it back up.
It left an impression on Josh. So yeah.
Yep. Timo, did you want Did you want to jump in here?
I did. Like, now that Josh mentioned that, I think I was there as well, and because my vague recollection was initially being really annoyed, because as like the founding president, I was just like, I should be in charge of this meeting, and these guys are hijacking it. And I think it just grew in more and more intrigued. I was like, are these guys for real? What is it? And I just have a vague recollection of that. But
yeah. Well, George, thanks for coming here, and thanks for not leaving immediately after that embarrassing revelation about your avant-garde painting. But we have another guest joining us, and he was referenced earlier.
He was.
It is Ben. Hello, Ben.
Hey, how are you? Were you just telling the story of that painting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, man. Whew. Do you remember the name that you came up with? I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was Bayron Schultz.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good job.
Well, that is creativity and youth in its prime. I'm going to give it one of these.
That sounds awesome.
Yes.
I wish I could recall this.
Yeah. Well, Ben, we were just kind of going around and talking about who we all were, and Ben was one of the folks who helped take over the Poetry Society after what I'm going to call the original founders kind of moved on and went on to do other things. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the original founding of the Poetry Society. So George, Ben, just hang out. We got a bunch of questions for you coming up. So, but jump in if you have something you wanna offer too. Jen and Tim O, how did you come to start this Poetry Society? I really would like to know.
Let me see.
I remember clearly.
Okay. All right. Tim
Timo,
seems
go
to
ahead.
remember.
All right. Well, I was interested in poetry in high school, and I had written a few haiku that got published somewhere from some, I don't know what it was. It's some college associated paperback of some sort. And I was very interested in writing poetry at that time. And when I went to my it wasn't orientation, it was went scouting for UMass, and they gave you a tour out there. I was like, oh, they have lots of student organizations. Do they have a poetry society? And someone was like, oh, yes, they do. And I was like, great, I'm going to join it when I get there. And when I got there wasn't one. And I was like, very disappointed. And then I was like, somebody said, you could just start your own. And I was just like, I could. And maybe I should. And so I just started hanging flyers, and I got a meeting together. And that was it. And I know Jen was there at the first meeting, and one of my friends from UMass was there at the first meeting. And I was trying to be very democratic about it. I was like, I don't need to be the president. We need to decide who's going to do what and then who wants to be a leader. And then my friend was just like, I think Tim should be the president. And I was just like, well, if you say so, of course, yes, that is fine with me. And then it just went off from there.
That's true. That sounds about right. So we had to register it as a registered student organization.
Yeah.
And my roommate,
RSO.
Yeah, my roommate Christine and I met with Tim, and we started it. I don't know. We started it. We posted it. We figured out how to navigate the UMass system, and how to become a registered student organization, and how to get funding. And I don't think we ever actually had office space, but we had regular meetings. And
So did you two do this organizational work together before you actually held a first official meeting of the Poetry Society?
I don't know. I remember meeting you. I remember there being a blackboard. I don't know, in a room.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was a bunch of people that showed up. I don't think there was very many at the beginning. And then we just started advertising it.
Yeah. Tim, were you able to discover, had there been a Poetry Society before you that went defunct, or tell me
Yes.
about that.
Okay, so when I went to figure this all out, I went to the student organization body, whatever it was called, and I said I thought there was a poetry society. I said, oh well, no, but here's their charter. You can have it. And I was just like, oh well, then I can just use this to revive the poetry society. But when I read it, it was pretty rinky dinky in my opinion. So I was like, we're gonna have to rewrite this, which we did. We rewrote it, and we just added a few things here and there, and nothing serious.
Yeah.
And I was doing some research earlier this week, and
Yeah.
I went on the UMass website to see if they are currently formed in some way still. And they are. And they still have that charter.
Oh,
Yeah, it was last
held up.
updated. Yeah, it was last updated in 2016,
that's cool.
which is still 20 years after you updated it
I know, right?
back all those years ago, Timo.
Way back when.
I know.
Yeah. So when you held the first meeting, okay,
Yeah.
you did all of this work.
Yeah.
You revitalized the Poetry Society student organization. That was Ted. There's some sort of sushi meltdown happening over there, wherever he is. When you got all the organizational stuff together and you
Yeah.
held your first meeting, do you remember the first meeting when people
No.
started showing up?
No, I remember people
Yeah.
here and there. I remember we used to meet a lot in Central because Christina and I lived in Central. So there was a lot of meetings that happened in Central. There might have been a meeting or two that happened in Butterfield when it used to be Butterfield,
Yeah.
for people who remember that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess when you started,
Yeah, there was that guy. What was his name? Magical Myko or me?
Sharky?
No.
Sharky.
No, there was some guy. He reminded me of Willy Wonka. And we've been in his room once. I remember that.
But when I started going to these meetings,
Yeah.
they were in the campus center
Yeah,
in the
we got-
basement.
We took it out of the dorms and made it a little bit more serious, I think.
Yeah. Why did you do that? Why did you take it out of the dorms?
Loosey goosey, maybe.
What does that mean?
I don't know. What do people do in the dorms?
Timo, do you remember meeting in the dorms and then deciding you needed to take this to a better space? Is that something you remember?
I remember meeting in the dorms, but
Yeah.
I don't remember how we came to the decision to meet in a different space. Basically, you had to reserve it, and that required an additional administrative step.
Yeah.
So it took us a while to get to that stage. I think for at least the first semester, we were in
You were in the
Jen's.
dorms.
Yeah, we were in Jen's room or
Yeah.
whoever was available.
Yeah. for sure.
Yeah, we had quite a few meetings in Jen's room.
So did I.
Not in
For
that year.
For the record,
Not
I had
then.
many meetings in Jen's room.
Oh my God. All right. Moving along.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and Tim, as you were recollecting, there were some characters that were part of that group.
yeah. Now somebody wrote in the chat. Joshua Michael Stewart wrote, "Who was the vampire kid?" And there was a guy.
You're right. There was a guy.
And I know his name. His name was Matt. And there were lots of eccentric people who came to the Poetry Society.
Yeah.
And one of the things I want to ask Josh, and I have an answer for myself, is how you discovered it, the Poetry Society. As somebody who wasn't involved in the founding, like how did you discover it, and how did you begin to get involved with the Poetry Society?
I discovered it by the, I want to call it the Advocate, but it wasn't. Whatever
The Collegian.
the Collegian newspaper, and you guys put an ad in that.
Oh, look at us advertising.
And I just saw it in there. It was either that or on a flyer. And then I just came to the meetings. And, you know, like you were saying earlier about how you didn't think I would be a poet, you know, from the first time you heard me read until now. I mean, I wanted to get into poetry, but I knew absolutely nothing about poetry, you know, other than whatever, you know, Robert Frost poem that they forced us to read, you know, in high school or whatever. You know, I was a music kid. I was a jazz kid. In fact, the way I got into any type of poetry was through jazz. I was, you know, into jazz, playing jazz, listening to jazz. And my best friend went to UMass Lowell. And as you know, you can't go to Lowell without knowing Jack Kerouac. And then, of course, through that, you meet Allen. You're introduced to Allen Ginsberg and all the beat poets who are heavily influenced by jazz. The first real poet I ever read was Langston Hughes, and again, the only reason why I chose him was because of, you know, his blues poems and his jazz poems. And the first like contemporary poet I read was Charles Simic. And again, the only reason why I read Charles Simic was because his book, which came out in '96, Walking the Black Cat, the cover of the book looks like a jazz album.
Huh.
And that's the only reason why I picked it up. And then, of course, you know, there's all this surrealist crap going on. And that was that was like the epiphany. That was like this is poetry. Like poetry can be this.
Yeah.
And of course, and then you got Charles Simic, you got James Tate, and of course, James Tate teaches at UMass, and every poet in the world goes to UMass thinking they're going to take a class with James Tate, and then of course, then you're connected with Russell Edson, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I wanted to, I was completely green about poetry, and I was like, you know. I didn't want to change majors and become an English major or anything. So I was like, this would be the next best thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this before and it bears repeating. I think I was incredibly lonely and looking for friends. I had moved into this house where I didn't really know anybody. I didn't live on campus. And I spent 2 years without friends going to this major university. And I think that fall semester, I just took stock of myself. I was like, oh, I've got to go do something. I've got to get involved with something. And I liked writing, right? I could write poems. I like most moody, self-obsessed, narcissistic teenagers, I would scribble poems in my notebook, my spiral-bound notebook, which I still have. It's like, I'm going to go give this Poetry Society a shot. I think I saw that flyer somewhere. And
those flyers were super effective. Better than social media.
I was walking through the campus center. I saw the flyer. I took it home. I put it on my desk. I stared at it for a while. right? And I said, well, this is your moment, Sawtooth. This is your moment to do something, to change the course of your life. So I wrote a poem, which I will read here later.
Oh my God.
I wrote this poem. I'm going to read it on this episode.
Yeah.
I walked into that room, and there I did not notice you, Stomping Jen.
That's true
We've said
for
this.
very many months.
Yes, but I noticed Tim O. He's not the tallest person, but he's very muscular.
Oh my gosh.
He has jet black hair.
Where is this going?
We're sharing my recollections, and he was leading the group.
Ah.
I said, who is this fella? I sat down. I listened to people read poems.
And you were like, these are my peeps.
Well, then I stood up. And I said, I have got a poem to read.
Oh my God. All right.
And I will read this poem later. And
Yeah.
that's how I got involved.
Excellent.
Right?
Yes.
Now let's ask Ted.
Yes.
We haven't heard much from Ted. Now I see he's done eating this sushi that he was eating before. He's leaning against a wall of some kind. Now let's ask Ted how he got involved with the Poetry Society.
I'll have to dredge my memory for this. So I believe I came, I think probably like many of us, as an angsty freshman who had written poetry in high school. I believe there was a poem that I had published in my high school newspaper called The Cynic, which was terribly embarrassing, but very apt for like a 14-year-old to write, I think. And I think I was just walking through the long concourse of the student union, kind of my freshman year. And I feel like I must have, I don't remember who was at the table. I feel like it must have been like Tim and Stomping Jen who were there, though.
Oh, right. We had
Could it have been anybody
tables.
else?
We had tables. I
But
forgot about the
it was like-
tables.
The first week, you go through and there are all the clubs. There's like the poster sale and all the clubs the first week that you could sign up for. And I think this was the one that sort of struck my fancy.
Huh.
And I was like, I know what poetry is.
You
I've written poetry. I should go to this meeting.
you like Leonard.
Also, we were selling brownies and they were delicious.
I didn't make them.
Oh, you were selling
Where did we get
brownies?
brownies from?
We were doing it to raise money, I think.
Yeah. Like a bake sale.
Yep. Now I
Wait,
want to.
wait. Ted was like you liked Leonard Cohen a lot, right? Am I
I did
recollecting?
like Leonard Cohen.
I
No,
feel like-
you're totally right.
No, I remember that about you.
I did like Leonard Cohen because some girl I dated in high school had introduced him to me.
Ah,
And so I was very into Leonard Cohen.
okay.
And for our listeners who
true.
there may be people who don't know who that is. Leonard Cohen was a musician
should
and
go-
poet and writer. He was a Canadian musician,
I feel
poet,
sorry
writer.
for you if you don't know who Leonard Cohen is.
There may be some folks who
But they
don't
should
know.
look him up.
Some of the younger
Right.
kids
Yeah.
may not know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll say he after Trump got elected, he died. He couldn't handle it. He was like, I'm checking out. Fuck this. I have to say, I saw Leonard Cohen 2 years
Oh,
before
who
he
bought you
died.
tickets?
You did. Thank
Oh,
you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, it was an amazing show. Absolutely amazing. Now, I want to ask George and Ben, who did go on to take over the leadership of the Poetry Society. How did you come to get involved in the Poetry Club? Was it a similar way? Was it walking through a concourse? Was it seeing a flyer? I'm interested in hearing this. So we'll let you go first, Ben.
I mean, I don't have a clear-cut day in my mind when that happened, but there was, it's probably a similar kind of thing. Like, I think George and I both had like a pretty big interest in poetry, and we were already living that sort of semi-beat kind of mind, reading all those folks and getting kind of hooked into some odd kinds of music and performance. And I think we were just intrigued by, I don't know, the idea of a poetry society. I don't even remember where we discovered it or how. It was probably the same kinds of things, like the collegiate or the tabling. And suddenly it was like, let's go to this event, these meetings. I think it was like a Tuesday night or whatever. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know, George, you have a good memory, right? You remember?
I think it was. I think you're pretty much right. Yeah, that we went to those meetings, and we, as you, Joshua, so kindly recollected. I think we had this sort of thing where it was. I don't want to say it was confrontational, but we were just sort of really throwing our energy out into the world and seeing if other people kind of vibed with us. And being really interested in poetry, we'll go into those meetings. And I have a big memory of going, and I think, Sawtooth and Jen, I think you left, and I think there was maybe a vacuum that was created by that. And I vaguely remember Ben and I going somewhat regularly to those meetings. And I think I vaguely remember someone being like, "Do you want to become the president?" And Ben and I were like, and so we became co-presidents because I think we were both kind of like nervous about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it was really like the grouping of people that had been going to those meetings recognized that someone needed to do it. And I think Ben and I just probably seemed unhinged enough to be willing to take it on.
Well, what was that? Thinking back, what was that like for you having to step into a leadership role like that? Because my recollection is these meetings were like very well attended. There were lots of people there. It seems like that was probably a pretty early opportunity in your lives to experience leadership and do something like that.
We were pretty active, I think. Like we were in bands and that sort of things. Like, so we were putting on events. So I don't think there was that concept was too intimidating. And I honestly think we probably didn't have the depth of self-reflection to be too nervous about it. I think it was really like we just were like on high speed and looking forward. I don't know, Ben, if you haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was a combination of an interest in poetry and performance and, confrontational art making with a perspective vision of being a teacher someday. And I think there was at least some part of me, looking back, this is how it looks. But then I don't know if I had that mindset, but there was a part of me that was like, oh, this is like the way you might organize people to talk about literature or talk about poetry. And I always enjoyed, I think we would sometimes bring a poem and talk about it, like a published poem. And I think for me, that was almost the first place where I wanted to test my chops in a way for what it's like to be in front of people with a literary agenda kind of thing. And, it definitely took me to where I am now. So in some ways,
Yeah. Josh.
So I just want to, jump in and, after you two left, it was, Chanel and I were, and then I think Tim also left soon after you guys. And Chanel and I were kind of like the last of the original guard, and we were leaving, fairly soon, because I left in May of '99. Mm-hmm. And that's why we went to George and Ben and was like, someone needs to take this over. And, it's funny because, they say it's like they were confrontational, but, confrontational art in that. But we dug it. We loved it. We thought they were great. We would have these open mics and everyone would, have their poem and, everyone's like, yeah, and all that, and then these two would go on stage and they would have guitars and then they would drape sheets over themselves and then they would play this song while under the sheet. And, this bed sheet. And so they would just do all these really wacky, strange performance art stuff, even though, mostly we were thinking it's just like a poetry open mic, but they would just bring it to a whole new level. Mm-hmm. And where others may be like, well, this is supposed to be poetry or whatever, but we just loved it. We thought it was great. And of course, there was the time where I wasn't there for this open mic, but there was a infamous open mic down in that art room in the
Art
student
gallery. Yeah.
I think they poured paint on themselves.
Yeah, I painted George while he played Hank Williams. This is a very like ridiculous concept that we were trying to put together. It was George went up and played like a Hank Williams song, and I think we had like a video camera set up so that it was like pointed toward to you, George, and it was like broadcasting to the audience. Some weird twist there, and then halfway through his song, I started screaming at him from the audience and being all pissed off and upsetting the audience. And then I ran up there with a can of paint and just started, like, I think with my hands, as I recall, just painting him. It made a horrible, horrible mess. And the event had to be paused. The woman who ran the space, Paula, was not pleased, to say the least, man. I mean, she went into a state of anger that it took a long time for us to make up. Like I worked on that for a while. She was not happy. And I remember, I actually felt pretty good. I felt pretty good about what we had done. I mean, at the time, and somebody afterward, this grad student, Steve, his name was, came up to me, or George, I think you were there too, but he said like, yep, performance art, it's always got to have its revolutions, or it's always got to have its, like, he made some comment about it, which put it into like a place of like, oh yeah, this is actually a thing that has some validity in some way. I don't know if it did or not, but
I mean, at the time, did you see these performance, what do we want to call them?
Performance art.
Performances as having some kind of connection to poetry in your minds at the time?
In my mind, it did. Yeah, I don't know about you, George.
Yeah, they did, and I also think, not to talk about us too much, but we also did do, a lot of just very sort of more straight poetry work, and the meetings were really focused around published poets, and we would have copies, and we would talk about those, and we would put on open mics with featured readers and things. So we had a particular interest in the sort of performative side of things, but we also had, and I think honored the sort of, written word in more traditional senses of it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I remember when I was attending the Poetry Society, I would sometimes bring in a song, right? Or that the lyrics spoke to me in a particular way, or they felt very poetic to me. Mm-hmm. I think I brought in a Leonard Cohen song once or twice. And I remember there were some people in the group who were like much more traditionalists when it came to poetry. And they're like, those are songs. That's not poetry. We cannot talk about them here. And I'm bringing that up because as we've gone on and done this podcast over 3 years, many, many people in different artistic arenas have talked to me about how they feel there's a poetry to their art, right? Painters, photographers, people who...
all sorts of people.
Yeah, all sorts of
creative
artists
people connect
to poetry and feel like what they do is somehow connected to poetry in some way. It's interesting to me. I feel like for people, poetry isn't just what we think it is, kind of in a classical sense.
It means different things to different people.
Yes, Stomping Jen.
Oh, is that what it means?
So I find that very interesting.
Yeah. That
you were kind of exploring that angle, that piece of it. I want to ask you, Tim O and Stomping Jen, what are your early memories of these meetings and your poetry societies? You got it off the ground. Was it what you wanted it to be?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'll let Tim answer though, since he hasn't talked in a while.
Well, I remember being pretty uptight when I was in college. So, I tried to be as democratic and open-minded towards things as possible, but I certainly had my own limited view of what poetry was. But I don't know how limited it was. I mean, I was already interested in in, you know, a lot of the poetry, you know, like James Tate, just like, I thought, you know, he kind of blew my mind open in terms of like what poetry could be. And my, you know, if I were to go along the route of what, you know, my mother says it must have rhyme. It's not a poem if it doesn't rhyme, according to my mother. So I can't read her most of the poetry I've written, but yeah, I don't know. How conservative were we in our views?
Yeah, I don't think we were. We just, you know, we would come together, we would read things that we had written, we'd work on them together, you know, we'd get feedback. I think that was mainly what we were interested in at the beginning was, you know, I wrote this poem, I want to read it, I want a safe space to read it out loud and get some feedback on what other people think. And I think that was a forum in which people felt safe doing that. And yeah, we built this camaraderie and this community around it, you know, and like, because some of what ended up happening is initially, especially in that original group, is that we would do things not poetry related, but together. Like, so we would have our meetings, then we'd go down to the Blue Wall and we'd get like snacks and we'd hang out for quite some time and we'd go on road trips together and we'd go to the movies. So like we built like a little community that was based around poetry. You know, and UMass is such like a large university. And I think somebody once said to me, or I don't know if this is true, but you know, like you make of it what you want. You know, you create and you find those people and you create your own little community and it makes it feel a lot smaller.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I found in it, right? I mean, I did have some modest interest in writing and poetry, but I was mostly looking for, you know, a community,
a tribe.
Yeah, and I mean that's what I found there, right? And though that social aspect of it was so strong for me.
Right.
I mean, we ended up dating Stomping
I
Jen.
mean, there were people created out of
getting married and
having
children. Ted, I wanted to ask you: do you have recollections of what it was like when you started attending, and was it what you had wanted it to be, the Poetry Society? You know, do you have observations you want to share about your time there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I had quite these sort of avant-garde, high-minded notions of Ben and George at the time. I think I probably skewed more towards you, Sawtooth, in so much as I really valued it for its community, and there certainly was a poetry aspect that I really enjoyed to it as well, but you know, I think in the end, I didn't actually really have serious aspirations as a poet. It was just kind of more of a place to find community and to meet people around sort of a shared interest, but then kind of grow and extend beyond that. So I think in that sense, it really sort of was what I was hoping it would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Josh, I mean, I think of the group of us in terms of writers, you've gone the furthest, right, and are the most developed and have experienced a lot of success in terms of publishing and just kind of dedicating yourself to this craft, right? We've talked about this. Yeah. I'm curious how much the Poetry Society and what happened there and your experiences there kind of helped clear the path for you to start down.
Yeah, I think it did tremendously. And even though I went there because I wanted to learn more about poetry, like you and like Ted, I wanted a sense of community. Again, like you, I was, to be honest, when I joined, I was in a really, really bad spot. Things were not good for me at all. And, you know, I went there too because I was extremely lonely. I didn't really fit in with wherever I was at that time. So I went there again for community like you guys. And I don't know. I don't know at what point it went from just having curiosity to being very serious about it. I really don't know when that shift was. I mean, the thing was I've always wanted to be a writer since the age of 6. I know I've always wanted to be a writer of some kind, you know. So it was always there. And then, you know, it was after the Poetry Society, you know, the Poetry Society was done and gone. So then I joined other workshops, and then through those other workshops, then I met my mentor, you know, Ellen Doré Watson. And then that's where, you know, it really, really got serious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It
What do you
was
think?
never serious for me.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It was not serious.
Why wasn't it serious for you?
So I think for me, you know, in high school, I wrote a lot of poetry as an angsty teen. And then I think you and I met, and then that was the end. That was the end of writing poetry.
What do you mean by that?
Because I didn't feel maybe I didn't feel as
Do you
angsty.
mean we spent our time making poetry, Stomping Jen?
Stop it. No, I think like
Yes.
that, whatever drive, the need that I felt to write about things, and it just sort of dried up, and that was the end of it. But I looked.
So this is really a testament to me. I mean, you're saying I satisfied you, creatively, emotionally,
I didn't
physically.
say
You said you had no needs after you got
to
involved
write
with me.
poetry, but then how many years later I discovered that I enjoy doing collage art, right? Which was like a completely different type of poetry. So like what I then enjoyed doing was taking visual art that I could not draw myself or put together myself and steal it and then put words on top of that. So it's sort of it transformed, I think, over the years into some other
interesting
thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ben and George, I'm really interested in hearing, once you sort of got your legs under you and you were running the group, did you change anything from how it had been working? Did you get in there as leaders of the Poetry Society, Poetry Club, and say, oh, we're going to change this or that? I'm curious if you made any shifts that you can remember and how the group ran. I don't
remember being given too much guidance or being restrictions on the way it had to be run. We did start doing these types of sort of performances under the guise of the Poetry Society. I remember like we would get all these like cheap and free books of poetry and copy poems, and we would just sit out on the, you know, by the pond there and like give poems and books away, and we would like hold doors and say like sponsored by the Poetry Society. We did publish two journals.
Oh,
at least one. I don't know if there was two.
So yeah, I don't recall there being a whole lot of precedent. Not to say that the work before wasn't really great or important, but I don't remember there being like a manual being given to us and us like either saying we're going to do this or like tearing it up and saying we're gonna do it our own way. I think we just kind of went with our gut. But Ben, I don't know if you have a.
No, I don't think there was any framework. I don't recall there being an established publication, or was there? Was there something?
I don't think we ever pulled one together.
No, there was just that charter, right? Which we mentioned at the top of the top of the episode. Yeah, that still exists in some form. I found it earlier in the week,
which we probably
yeah.
No, we never did a journal. I don't know why.
I thought we had.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
Talk a little bit more about that, Tim. What's your memory of that?
I remember trying to put it together, and I remember taking submissions. I remember reading submissions. I just can't remember what we were going to call it. Because I remember the discussions we had about, what are we going to name it? And
Ted, Josh.
I do agree with Tim. I think we got as far as debating what the name was and reading submissions, and then never going further with it.
Yeah.
I also recall reading submissions with you, Tim, but I don't really know if it came to fruition. That I don't have a memory of.
Yeah, that makes sense. That would explain why I don't remember the name. That and whiskey.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why it never actually came about was because we could never settle on a name.
That seems ridiculous in hindsight.
Yeah.
The one we published was called "I Have a Dog."
I love it. It's perfect. I have a dog.
And we spent a lot of time fighting over that. I remember like the person I think Mike Braidman who ran it after we did, as I recall. I don't know if that's true. Wanted to call it like Edgar Allan poetry. That always stayed with me as like one of the worst possible things you could do, but also somehow interesting too. But yeah, we spent a lot of time going over like, what do we call this thing?
That's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, those silly poets getting hung up on words of all things.
Yeah. So I want to step into the virtual
Open mic.
coffee shop space.
Wait, so another memory is you loved hosting those open mics.
Oh, I did. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, somebody here said this earlier, it was an opportunity. Maybe it was Ben. For me, it was a space. The Poetry Club was a space